Have you ever wondered what wages, promotions, and family life looked like during the Cultural Revolution? Well, check out this interview part 2 with Maoist Fred Engst, a supporter of revolutionary movements worldwide, who gives us some particular insights in how art and culture were used as a weapon in the class struggle during the Cultural Revolution. Also, a bit of an insight into how to build up revolutionary movements and what awaits us for those of us trying to make revolution in our own countries. Enjoy. Thought it might be a good idea to start delving into the question of the difference between bourgeois right and bureaucratic privilege. First, just explain some of those differences and some of your research in that area, but that some of that differentiation wasn't always clear to people. And this was around the same time as really in the late 70s, where the theory of the inner party bourgeoisie was really starting to take root. Of course, Mao talked about it before. The capitalist voters, they're inside the party, and some of this theorization what was already happening, but it really seems that during the latter portion of the Cultural Revolution, these ideas are really starting to take root and be explored and be put into practice, or start to be put into practice, or attempts to, at a larger scale.
Well, bourgeois right is something that majority of the population thinks right is so natural. For example, we saying the harder you work, you should earn more. The longer hours you work, you should earn more. The people with more responsibility should earn more. For example, in union contracts, the skilled laborers get more wages than the assembly line workers. People with more skill earns more. People with more responsibility. For example, some of the unions, they will argue that even though I know some union, for example, in Los Angeles, they says a regular truck driver is one type of wage, but if they load up more responsibility, it requires different skill. So different skill class have different wages. And these are what's called a bourgeois right. Just think that it is natural, so-called natural, okay, that people with more ability work harder, should get more income. Another part of bourgeois right is that more you invest, the more you expect the return. The higher the risk, you want to compensate it with a higher interest. These are all the dominant ideology within capitalism. Now, Marx, in the Critique of Gotha program, points out that socialism, at least in the first stage, people cannot just overnight overcome all the heritage from the old society, and they inherit a lot of the baggages. So this ideology about bourgeois right still dominates to a large extent, only so as far as the harder you work, the more you get for your effort. But the bourgeois right about the more investment you have, more right you have, that is abandoned. That's been overturned. It's not like saying socialists will maintain all the bourgeois right, then there's no socialism left, okay? So as far as people who invest, people who have some money, and money talks, that is being no longer the case, and working class will not go for that. However, the harder you work, the more hours you work, more income you get, that is being treated as normal. Now, given that, there's also a difference between society that's not far away from feudal society versus society that's very pure capitalist like US. The idea of bourgeois right is not quite the same. For example, in China, it is so commonly accepted that the more senior you are, the more wages you should have. So that is not equal work for equal pay. I mean, US workers, when I went to steel mill, when I went to the auto worker, and we all earn the same. They don't care what your seniority. So in the US, people really believe very deeply equal work for equal pay. But in China, it's very common. People who have longer seniority, of course, should deserve more. See, that is actually it's a feudal tradition in a sense. After the revolution, you move away from the system of issuing. Like in the army, you have issue. You can issue cloth, you can issue food, you eat in cafeteria, and you don't have to have wage. You can do that kind of a system. Before the revolution, all the party cadres and army, they were not government issue, but it's a revolutionary issue. They get their shoes, they get their cloth and everything based on uniform distribution. But after you establish a new republic, you convert to a wage system. Then how do you set up the wages? Do we have egalitarian, or do we have a different class scale of wages? Some of these people argue that we should have egalitarian wages, but that doesn't work for many reasons. One, you have, after the revolution, many of the old intellectuals or even some nationalist KMT generals came to the revolution. They don't believe in having the same pay scale as workers. The workers have different pay scale based on seniority to begin with. So what do you do with the party cadres? You have different responsibility and you have different pay. That part, pay according to work, pay according to responsibility, that is bourgeois right. And you cannot easily eliminate that, especially you practice democratic centralism. Majority of people in the party believe in that. What do you do? You're going to overrule the majority? You'll be labeled as dictator, right? So you have to surrender to the majority ideology to a certain extent. So the issue is not whether we should all get the same pay. Even with the same pay, it's not equal because every family have different family size. You see, that's what Marx in a critique of Gothic program points out, okay? Whatever equality standard you use is unequal. Another way of looking at it. There's no objective universal equality. You can have a big chunky guy should eat same thing as a skinny woman. We have different appetite, we have different body size, and we have different tastes. The egalitarianism cannot satisfy everybody. It doesn't work. Just from that standpoint. So instead of making everybody issue 2 shoes or 2 pants and 2 coats and every year, we give you wage and you decide how much to buy. Do you want to buy cloth shoes? Do you want to buy sneakers? Do you want to buy high heel shoes? Whatever you want to buy, okay? So more flexibility. But then the real issue is that do we upheld the idea to each according to their responsibility? That's a bourgeois right, to each according to their responsibility. In a capitalist firm, in a corporation, each level has higher pay. That is to each according to their responsibility. In China, that bourgeois right was not overthrown. And that sowed the seed for the capitalist rulers. Because if you institute a policy of to each according to their responsibility, then the inner party struggle is no longer about what is the best for socialism, but what's best for my family. Because if I have different agreements with the leadership, and if I got promoted means I have more responsibility. And with more responsibility, my kids can go to better school. We can live in better housing. We have better transportation. We have better food. Everything comes with that to each according to their responsibility. So it's very poisonous. Then if you, an inner party struggle, you lost, you got demoted, your whole family suffered. You can imagine a lot of people who joined the revolution in China, even today, a lot of people who become revolutionaries because they saw injustice in society or injustice they experienced themselves. And so you can imagine that revolutionary leaders after revolution in an inner party struggle, and some people felt that they disagree with the leadership. But the risk of disagreeing with the leadership is to be demoted. But once you get demoted, the whole family's living standards, everything demoted too. And I had a schoolmate from Xi'an Middle School. She's about 3 years senior than me. Her father was a high party official in the Shanxi province. Her father is a provisional party secretarial staff in charge of education and cultural affairs before 1959. He came from a poor peasant family. He was the boy who go to landlord's family and herd their sheep. And he's a higher hand. And then he joined the revolution and then fought the war. And then after the revolution, become a very high-ranking officials in the province. But this guy is he's not a person that talks sweet. He's not very smooth. He likes to speak his mind. And when he sees something wrong with his superior, he doesn't hide it. And so during the anti-rightist campaign in 1957, he was criticized, was not demoted. And then 59, when Deng Xiaoping came to Xi'an, asked the party committee how many people in the party committee was classified as rightists. And the party committee feel very embarrassed. They don't have anybody classified as rightists. Deng Xiaoping has this style of leadership. If we have 5% is reactionary, you got to have 5% in your place. So after Deng left, they reluctantly decided that my schoolmate's father is rightist. He was demoted. Whole family left the city in Xi'an, came to the farm. All her siblings left the school privileged education, came to the farm, become like us. And his father become working with the cows and earning a little bit above the farm laborers' labor. You can just think about enormous price to be paid if you disagree with the leadership. So that is bureaucratic privilege, to each according to their responsibility. So basically, the higher you get up the rank, the more perks, more income you and your family can enjoy. That is a bourgeois rights that we have no reason to uphold under socialism. And you can have different wage scale, depends on your seniority. You can have a different rank based on your education background. You can have different wage scale based on your past contribution. That's all fine. Something objective. But when you get demoted, when you get promoted, that should not affect your income, basically, as a principle. And you know what? Cultural Revolution practiced that. See, you cannot be a designer, social designer. You think, oh, ought to be this way, ought to be that way. The class struggle doesn't go by your design. You have to study the actual class struggle and see what worked, what didn't work. And what did work is during the Cultural Revolution, no matter how high you rise or how low you go, like Wang Huan, Chen Yingui, these people, Wang Huan is from Shanghai textile mill, Chen Yingui is a farm leader, peasants. They all went to Central Committee, and one become deputy chairman of the party, one become deputy minister. They still earn what they earning before. And then opposite example, Deng Xiaoping was demoted and with no position in the party or in the army, but he still enjoy Mao Tai every day in that villa in the Jiangxi province. So when the personal income is independent of your position in the party, then you have the guts to fight against the incorrect leadership. You can be demoted. I'm not saying absolutely no effect. There will be some effect. However, when pay according to responsibility breeds capitalist voters, because they are actively defending this bureaucratic privilege. Bureaucratic privilege, I narrowed that just in terms of material well-being associated with the position you are in the hierarchy of the government, the party. So it's the pay according to responsibility. It is poisonous. Some people, for example, people, the follower of Trotsky, think that the people who in coordinating the production process in the socialized production, that is bureaucratic privilege. That's nonsense. That's not. The person that coordinating the socialized production in the factory, in the country, in the planned economy, what they say has to have authority. That's not bureaucratic privilege. That is necessary for socialized production. there are gray areas for sure, but we got distinguished between a bureaucrats. You can call it bureaucrat, you can call it a cadre, anyone you want to call. I mean, there's no difference. A cadre is a nice term. Bureaucrats is a derogatory term about anybody in leadership. They have two roles. One is how to coordinate socialized production. Another is how much they pay based on that position. Once we separate these two, I think a lot of things will be better. Studying the experience of cultural, that's the conclusion that I come.
So I have kind of two questions building off of this. The first is just, where did this system of pay according to responsibility come from? Was this something the Chinese party inherited from the Soviets, like as they were kind of setting up post 1949 in China? And then also, I was wondering, a major factor already complicating things in China post 1949, and it was the system of two lines where Liu Shaoqi and others were in charge of like the promotions within the party. So obviously, when you have a hardcore rightist in charge of the promotions, and then also the system of bureaucratic privilege, those can really compound and lead to all sorts of problems. So I was wondering if you could speak about that a little bit as well.
I need to study more, but I suspect it's learning a lot from the Soviet Union. And I wonder, I don't have the ability to read Russian or have time to study it, but the weakness, the shortcoming of Stalin is in his leadership style promotes this reward according to responsibility, because he does not mobilize the masses. He don't trust the masses. When you don't have a rely to masses based on the masses, how do you get the bureaucracy to function? So by having the system of reward based on responsibility, you have a powerful tool to discipline, to direct the bureaucracy to do things you want them to do, because they're afraid of losing their privileges. So under Stalin, the bureaucratic privileges exploded. And so a lot of things has to do with the Stalin's style of work or his world outlook. And it's not dialectical. I mean, even modern revisionism arrived from the shortcomings of Stalin, even though I don't think he's a conscious revisionist, but a lot of things he did lay the foundation. Being non-dialectical, like he does not want China to make revolution. I mean, just like compromise, have everything go through United Front, don't fight it, the nationalists, and even 49 says it's not a good idea to take over the whole China, and it just doesn't trust, it's not trusting the masses, trusting the people. He owned up to his mistake once he find out. He's not a diehard revisionist in that sense, but quite often he does not have the foresight to see things clearly. I mean, that happens to Zhou Enlai the same way. I mean, Zhou Enlai is that kind of person, doesn't have foresight. I mean, Zhou Enlai is a great organizer, and he's a tremendous ability, incredible brain. But Zhou Enlai is, I mean, it's Stalin the same way, colorblind on many important issues. So I think there's many similarities between Zhou Enlai and Stalin. They're colorblind on many important issues. And the difference between them and the revisionists is that once they see it, they own up to it. They're not disguising it and fighting back, that kind. So that's why you have to unite with the people and you fight against their shortcomings and their mistakes, but you trust they are want to make a revolution and you're trying to kill the disease and save the patient. So I think as far as Stalin, he doesn't trust the masses, doesn't rely on the masses. And so he have to be the one to decide what to right and wrong. Only way to mobilize the bureaucracy is using the threat. You don't follow the orders, I demote you. I mean, otherwise he has no tools. All right, how do you make the whole bureaucratic apparatus function? You got to threaten them with the carrots and sticks, okay? So that's my guess, okay? That's not based on a lot of research, but just my hunch, my guess.
You know, one example of this, precisely what you're talking about, is the question of the system of one-man management. Like during war communism, when that was adopted, Stalin agreed with Lenin's assessment that it was a temporary measure, a necessary one given the circumstances, but a temporary one. But then
Right.
less than a decade later, Stalin says, no, it's an objectively necessary thing for all of socialism. It's what socialist production should be, which, even Stalin a few years back knew that was wrong, but then he developed a new
Right.
blind spot. So yeah, and that really obviously reinforced bureaucratic privilege. So it makes sense, your remarks. The second question was just about this kind of confluence of, on the one hand, bureaucratic privilege, and then you have a lot of the rightists controlling the system of party promotion, like Liu Shaoqi, and just how that kind of played out a bit.
Yeah, that is not as clear cut as the people want to put it. It's like you have party, you have two-line struggle, but actually, what is hard is that if it's really a two-line struggle, the struggle is about means and not about aims. So what turned out is that Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping, they put forward looks like a two-line struggle, but actually a struggle over two different roads. And that's why it's complicated, because people can have very different ideas about means to achieve the goals. And from the early history, the inter-party struggle, whether follow the October Revolution model, urban rebellion, or surround the city with the countryside, all right, and protract the People's War, those is not clear at the beginning. A lot of people didn't know. It's from a lot of struggle, painful, and what ultimately came with the Long March is because so many people in the party didn't realize that Soviet road doesn't work in China. Yeah, because predominantly is a peasant society. Chinese capitalism is very weak. You don't have a huge industrial base. So people learn from practice and overcome the incorrect line. And also you have quite a few ultra-left line propagated first by Wang Ming, Li Lisan, and many others that think they have enough peasants' army to take over the city. And that's a adventurous line. But these people who make the mistake, they believe in revolution. That's different from revisionist. They do believe in revolution. So two-line struggle throughout the party before 1949, is all about the means to achieve the revolution. However, after 49, quite often, what looks like is struggle over means actually is struggle over aims. Of course, we are a Monday morning quarterback, okay? In hindsight, we are all 2020. In today, we can see that the early debate about whether or not to form agricultural co-ops was heated debate. In 48, 49, the party set up a long-term projection, and they think probably took 15 years to finish the socialist transformation of industry and agriculture. They set a goal for 15 years. And so they have a new democracy. It's a total different world after you defeat the Japanese, you defeat the nationalists on the battlefield, what to do, how to build new China, what the new China looks like. And it's all new. What to do with the national capitalists, how to modernize China, a lot of debates, a lot of arguments. And it's all new. People have no experience. They have to explore. Based on what they learned about Marxism, this party committee in Shanxi province, the place where Bill wrote the book, Fan Shen, in 1950, they wrote a proposal to the regional party committee headed by Liu Shaoqi. They says, after 4 years of mutual aid teams for 1946, after the Japanese surrendered, Shanxi had a big liberated area. They started a mutual aid team after land reform. They said they feel there's a bottleneck. We need to explore ways to build co-ops, move up the collectivization movement. And they purposely picked a few dozen mutual aid teams that's not a model, not the best, not the worst. And they want to see if we change from mutual aid team into co-ops, would that work better? They don't want to choose a model worked at the mutual aid team because that won't be easily replicated. They want to pick some middle ground type that more typical. They sent a proposal to Liu Shaoqi. Liu Shaoqi vehemently denounced them as dangerous utopian socialism. So the party committee was dumbfounded. They got so severely criticized. They feel like, wow, wait a minute, there's something wrong. But then they went back to Marx classics and they thought maybe he didn't give a right reason. So they want the Central Committee to reconsider their proposal. And Mao read it. And Mao talked to Liu Shaoqi, talked to Bourgeois, all these people, and convinced them we should explore the collectives. Apparently, Bourgeois was really convinced because in the 80s, his memoir, he says Mao convinced him, really convinced him. Liu Shaoqi didn't convince, he just agreed. And in 65, he's still getting a whole bunch of people who say, see, we have to have first mechanization before we have a collectivization. So that's the argument about whether first mechanization or first collectivization. On the surface, looks like two-line struggle over which way to build socialism. But now we learn, in hindsight, these people are not into collectivists. They want to promote individual family plots. They want capitalism, but they don't want to say it. That's the character of the revisionists, capitalist rulers. They don't speak their mind. They disguise in the name of a better way to build socialism. And so after Mao talked to Liu Shaoqi, talked to Bourgeois, and the collectives start springing up around the country. By 1956, the whole country, over 90% farms become collectives. And based on Chinese official statistics, from 49 to 59, per capita, we're not talking about total grain, Chinese population blossom, boom. And the grain production go up faster. That 10 years, the growth rate of grain production is unprecedented in Chinese history. Enormous growth in labor productivity, in the farm output. It proves that collectivization promotes labor productivity because labor can be better utilized, can be engaged in not only more efficient use of tools and animals, but you can have by machinery, everything. But there's another factor. The Korean War made a big impact in China. So 1950 to 53, US is superpower after World War II, fought against a sick man of Asia. They had a draw in the Korean. That is incredible. There's nobody in the world. I mean, US was never defeated by anybody. And only one time it has a draw, okay, is the Korean War. Of course, the US withdrew from Afghanistan, withdrew from Vietnam, not because they beat by the army, but just because they find it's not worthwhile. But they got beat, and they come to a peace negotiation on Korean War. But the price for that Korean War is enormous because the Chinese army trying to do the same thing they did in the 3 years of liberation, where they surrounded the KMT army, tens of thousands, and eliminated whole battalions of the army. They try to do the same thing with the US troops. They were successful surrounding it, but once the US finally be surrounded, they hop on the truck and they run really fast. Your legs just cannot outrun the trucks. And US has air power, has a lot of cannons, and it just beat the shit out of it. And so the price is enormous. It's like 10 to 1 or 5 to 1, and the price is very heavy. So the Chinese people further confirmed that we need industrialization. Without industrialization, we cannot defend ourselves. And not only is industrialization will liberate the peasants from the heavy labor farm worker, but to national defense, we got to have industrialization. And so Soviet gave China 156 different projects. And all these projects, it requires people come to work. But when you as workers work in the factory, you still have to eat. You have to have food. You have to have bread. Where do you get the bread? has to come from peasants. How to get surplus from peasants into workers' plate is a big issue. And Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping, these people find out when we have collectivization, the gathering of grain from peasants become a simple matter. You can have a tractor, wagon go to the village, and using the collective, you just put them in, load in the wagon, you ship them away. If you have individual farm, you got to go every family. Here, come on, give us your grain. Like what the Soviet did in Red Army, go in the countryside, getting the grains from these kulaks. It's very costly. When you have collectives, it's so easy. And so Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping, these people flip-flop from against the collectives to big promoter for collectives. And Liu Shaoqi actually in 1958 promoted People's Commune. And People's Commune is the size of a township, a dozen villages together. That makes collective grains even easier. And so they go overboard. And that leads to the collapse in 59, 60, 61. Very hard years. One part is because natural disasters, but also because these people, I don't fully understand their psychology. They boast in production, lying about production figures. Why do you do that? Why do you need to boast your production figures? So when you boast in your production figures, you're saying, last year we have so many tons of grain, this year we double. Well, if you double, your responsibility to the state also more than double, because every excess you should give it to the state, sell it to the state. But they don't have grain. So these officials in Hunan, in Anhui, in Shandong, in Sichuan, Sichuan has a bumper harvest something. Anhui, Henan, and Shandong, these three provinces are linked together. They are neighbor provinces. And they did have a bad year, 3 years, almost all 3 years. But these leaders from these provinces claim their production went up double, 50%, everything. But then there's no grain. They send people down to the village, arrest the leaders. You got to give us the grain. Where are you hiding your grain? Fascists. These people are fascists just because they want to hold on their official positions with that bureaucratic privileges. They boasted their production figures. They got promoted. And when their production doesn't show up, they might lose their official positions. They will resort anything they can. And they don't care how many people's lives will be lost. So these are fascists. So a lot of struggle in China. On the surface, looks like two lines, but actually is what road to go forward. And we have evidence now. These people came to power. They disbanded the commune. They disbanded collectives. So we have proofs. They were never for collectives. But they claim we should have mechanization first before we have collectivization. That just say, yeah, so that's why it's hard. After 49, you can't tell, are they genuine or not?
And it's very tough that things aren't so simple as a lot of times a lot of these differences are explained, where it's just a two-line struggle and you have the capitalist faction and the revolutionary faction, and that was kind of it. Yeah, I think especially if you look at some of those numbers between 54 and 56, like some hundreds of thousands of co-ops get disbanded, and people like Gao Gang, and then they're all for it and then they're not, and there's a lot of back and forth. But something that's really interesting about what you said is that, for me, that period of the Great Leap Forward, when people like Liu Shaoqi blow the communist wind, the way that it's usually framed is it's mainly sabotage, and that could be a portion of it, as in, okay, the communes will be unsuccessful and then we can break it down, and okay, now we have to have the main level of operation, the administration at the commune level rather than the team level, and something resorted like that, and then that kind of going awry, then okay, so maybe actually we'll have the three freedoms, and we'll expand these plots and you can sell more grain and some of these things that switch. And I think that's well established. But something which you put forward also is that at the same time, there are ways that the communes did serve the capitalist logic of people like Liu Shaoqi, which is so important if we really want to emphasize what a capitalist rotor is. And I know in your article, you have the three components of a capitalist rotor, and one of it is applies a capitalist logic. And I think that framework, I just really want to emphasize it to avoid this one-sided anti-dialectical thinking that was just, they're just against the communes. But on the other hand, there is a way in which they served the capitalist logic, the project. And we see that in the way of the infrastructures that the communes helped to build of labor and their great leap forward to just all the dams that were built, the high levels of irrigation, the industry, and really using this communist fervor that genuinely existed amongst the people to be able to channel that for Liu Shaoqi into this further capitalist logic, which is really the logic that won out at the time. So this is not a question, but I just wanted to share this light bulb that went off to go into a deeper complexity into this question of either the two-line struggle or the two-road struggle.
Right. Yeah, actually, I would further add some more to this, is that without that 3-year difficulties, I don't think Mao will recognize capital rotors for what they are. Why did I say that is because in the 1962, in the spring, in February, they had a 7,000 cadre meeting to summarize the 3-year difficulties, famines, and everything. So the exaggerations, use of power, everything was being talked about it. And also in 1958, they built the People's Commune, and soon Mao find out that the counting unit should not be at the commune level. So he promotes this the 3 level of ownership. You have work team, you have brigades. Yeah, work team is like a few dozen families, and the brigade will be a village, maybe 100 some families. You have quite a few brigades, and then you have commune, which is a township with a half dozen or dozen villages together. So the ownership, 3-level ownership, and so land belongs to a work team level. But in a brigade, you can have a pig farm, you can have some other kind of sideline production. Commune, you can have small industry, all that stuff. So Mao was able to take what Liu Shaoqi promote, this People's Commune, take the good part of it, and never always protect that part, and then overcome the shortcomings of 2 big accounting units and make the egalitarianism that destroyed people's enthusiasm for labor. Because more well-to-do brigades or the work team feel they've been taken advantage of by the poor brothers and neighbors, and the poor village feel, why should we work hard? We can just siphon some off from there. They can help us. And agriculture is heavy labor, so make a big difference. So incentive system, more direct, helps the labor see the fruit of labor. But if it's not a very strenuous labor, then people can be very generous. And so these are the relationship in production and the relationship between the labor productivity and all that. Then after that 7,000 cadre conference, Liu Shaoqi and other people says that we cannot stop at work team level accounting. We need to go down to private farming. And that triggers Mao's alert. In the summer '62, in a Politburo meeting, Mao made it very clear, if you guys want to go private farming, I need to start a revolution. You're gonna split the party. So Mao saw these people first oppose collectivization, then went to this communist wing, go to the other extreme. When they fumble and disasters 3 years with the famine and everything, what's their solution? Private farming. Now, if private farming is a solution for difficulty, why do we bother with socialism? It's so clear. That's why Mao all of a sudden realized, you guys don't have the same aim. You don't have the same aim. This is a struggle about 2 roads, not about 2 lines. It's about which direction. But he still feels these people might be mistaken in understanding. So he still wants to hope to educate them, change their minds. And socialist education movement didn't work, so try the Cultural Revolution. And he always had some illusion. People, Liu Shaoqi, people, Deng Xiaoping, can be educated. Well, I don't know. I mean, based on what you know at the time, let's not be Monday morning quarterback. At the time, do you have hard evidence that these people are real diehard capitalist voters? Maybe not. I mean, they can talk, okay? Deng Xiaoping made a self-criticism. What do you do with people who make self-criticism? How is Deng Xiaoping's self-criticism different from Zhu De's self-criticism in the 30s and Zhou Enlai's repeated self-criticism in every two-line struggle? How do you know Deng Xiaoping is genuine or not? Of course, we have a hindsight. Mao was being fooled by these people. But you got to be in that time, given what you know. Deng came to power in 75, 74. I was still in the factory those days. We read the Central Committee documents suggesting Deng come back to work. And it was not known that time Zhou Enlai had cancer. So I was in the factory. We all studied Deng Xiaoping's self-criticism. And his self-criticism was looked very genuine.
Yeah, you read it and you're like, oh, wow, he's really admitting all his mistakes. Yeah.
Right. I mean, he says everything you want him to say. What can you do? And so in 75, he started being more confident and he just starting crack down. And so he exposed himself. But I don't think the Cultural Revolution failed because Mao let Deng came to power or did not see through Zhou Enlai. Some people think Zhou Enlai is the most disguised capital voters, and that's a lot of BS to me.
That was a big theory the RCP advanced after 1976, 78. They really focused on Zhou Enlai. But so I think this is a good transition point to some of our other questions. Now, in particular, I agree with what you're saying that, you can't just say, okay, Deng Xiaoping comes back, therefore that's what caused the Cultural Revolution to be defeated. But it seems there was a real problem, not just amongst the masses, but even within some of the left in the party in really understanding the nature of the capitalist voters, the inter-party bourgeoisie. And it's only really in the last few years that these things start to get summed up. And as you're saying, it's not an easy thing. I mean, in retrospect, it's obvious. But at the time, it's hard to differentiate between those who are genuinely supporting the socialist road but making some mistakes and those who are fundamentally committed to capitalism. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about that. And in particular, like there's these campaigns at the end of the Cultural Revolution, Mao's directives around understanding the bourgeoisies in the party itself. How well understood were these, both amongst the left and amongst like the middle forces in the party?
I cannot speak from personal experience because I left China in 74, but I talked to people, my friends, my parents, and read out of historical material. My impression is that on the newspaper is very lively, pouring with all these things, but it's just only scratching the surface. Most people pay lip service to that, and they don't fully understand all this struggle, what's about. That's true not only in Beijing and other cities, but even Shanghai. And also you read Li Xun's book, The Era of Revolutionary Rebellion, 革命造反年代, it's a Chinese book. It's pretty obvious in those days. It's like the rebels came to power in Shanghai, but then they become institutionalized. And so then there's a lot of things that Zhang Qing and Zhang Chunqiao did. It's not that, it's somewhat regrettable. They didn't really mobilize the masses and trust the masses. For example, in art and literature, even Shanghai is too much control, too much afraid then people make a mistake. So end up not too many working class art and literature being promoted, even though there were a lot, but it's not blossoming. And in fact, there's a struggle in that book that illustrates that there's one rebel leader I interviewed many times. He's the head of the workers' headquarters convert to trade union, Ye Changming, and they at the time in the 70s, there are a lot of workers like to write novels, write poetry. They like to have a place to publicize. But the avenue is so limited, people will feel frustrated. So Ye Changming just thought, how about we just do a mimeograph style? Let's not call this something official. So don't get the people alerted, doing things almost underhanded. I mean, why working class need to do this stuff? And then they struggle over this Zhaoxia magazine. Zhaoxia magazine was organized by the intellectuals in Shanghai. They want to have some more literary stuff. And some of the intellectuals wrote a novel, wrote something sarcastic about the workers' headquarters. And so workers' headquarters not happy with these articles, and they want to have a critique what's in the Zhaoxia magazine. That argument went up to Zhang Zhenqiao, and what did he do? Close down Zhaoxia magazine. And his argument says, we are not a capitalist society. We don't have the freedom press, capitalist freedom press. So then we just don't have press. That's a sort of a, I cannot buy that argument. So you can see that once the revolutionaries came to power, how do you run society doesn't automatically mean you are revolutionary. You're criticizing the old capitalist rulers. The approach is not to make it tighter. You have to trust the people, trust the masses. So a lot of intellectuals are not happy with Jiang Qing's firm control in literature. It's understandable. The workers' headquarters also feel Zhang Zhenqiao doesn't trust them as much as he trusts intellectuals in his writing group. So these are the things that made the masses passively participating in that movement. First, there's a movement to criticize Confucius and Lin Biao, and a lot of these rebels feel this is a chance for us to vent our grievances. And because there's always friction between the rebel leaders who incorporate into the power structure versus the old cadres who restore their position. Some of these people, old cadres, they're holding a grudge on the people who criticized them in the past. I mean, we are human. We have memories. We're not machines. And they hold a grudge, and the rebel leaders feel they've been window dressed. They don't have real power, all kinds of complaints. So the movement criticized Lin Biao and Confucius. They said, oh, this is our chance to vent our grievances. They start doing more things. And all of a sudden, Mao criticized Jiang Qing for having this movement against the back door and everything. So the movement just stopped. So a lot of people in the workers' headquarters feel they've been played. It's just like, you want us to do this thing for a while, then you want to do something else. So I think a lot of these campaigns on the surface is a hot topic, but it's only a hot topic by the people who control the media, not real hot topic among the masses. So I think towards the end of the Cultural Revolution, you have this dilemma. You have the places, Wuhan and other places, factional fighting make people tired. So they sort of become apolitical in a sense. They find all these arguments doesn't have real essence as a power struggle among the rebel leaders, among the old cadres. It's a power struggle and doesn't affect their lives. And so they are very put off by that. And you have places like Shanghai. These are rebels who took over the city, but the people who are not in a leadership position feel they're somewhat disconnected. So basically, how you continue the revolution under the dictatorship of proletariat is implied when working class rebels in control. How do you deal with the contradiction? Under socialism, there is a very profound contradiction. One hand, you cannot go without party's leadership. Other hand, you cannot go without people's supervision. That is contradiction. So when rebels come to power, how do you deal with the grumbling among the masses? How to deal with the factionalism among the masses? Once you overcome factionalism, how do you not divorce from masses? In retrospect, Zhang Zhenqiao is somewhat conservative in the sense that he don't feel like he's like these generals who founded liberated areas. and he just makes sure Shanghai don't make a mess. So he's a guardian. He doesn't want anything goes wrong, but rather rely on the masses, believe in the masses, and let them explore and how to handle this contradiction. Of course, those days nobody talked about that contradiction. So we are in hindsight. So I asked these rebel leaders, you are head of the union. How do you see party leadership and the supervision of the party by the workers? How do you see the contradiction? We didn't have any of that understanding at that time. So that's the reality. People only learn from their mistakes. People don't just by design know what's the right thing to do.
So in that overall evaluation, yeah, how do you in general evaluate the Gang of Four in that process?
Well, I mean, there are staunch revolutionary fighters. Other than Zhang Zhenqiao, I have not seen any incidents these people independently know what's to do. They just follower of Mao, and they believe what Mao said is right, and they defend Mao's line, Mao's approach to their best ability. But only Zhang Zhenqiao had a clear example that he independently, without knowing what Mao would think, agreed to the rebels' demand in '66 at incredible risk to his future. And he's not opportunist. Later on, people saying he's just opportunist. There's no opportunist stupid to do that. He didn't believe that Shanghai would have that many reactionary workers. He didn't say it, but I can see clearly either he agreed to workers' demand or he had to send the army to crush the workers. His basic instinct is with the working class. So he's tested in that sense.
You're talking
Other
about
three,
the Unting incident?
yeah, anti-instant, right.
Yeah.
He's tested. So for that, I really admire him, his courage, his independent thoughts, his based on principle, knowing what to do in that crisis. And you got to admire him. There's no other way around. But his shortcomings, I also learned a lot more later. But it's, we are our Monday morning quarterback. We have no right to condemn people for making that kind of mistake because we didn't have the foresight either. All right. However, we cannot surrender our advantage of Monday morning quarterback. We have to analyze what went wrong, what went right. So from this analysis, I can see that he's somewhat conservative. And also just a few things that we talked about, for example, on art and literature and too tight control, not trust and believe in the masses, knowing that masses learn from their mistakes. So let people write, let people talk. The sky's not fall. I mean, if there's some mistake, criticize, but criticize in the spirit of curing the disease to save the patient, not to knock people down. So in this area, I think M4 made a lot of mistakes there. And that laid the basis for the capitalist voters took the grievances that people have and win over their favor, all right? Another thing is about Yao Wenyuan. He's a very little thing to know about him. But Wang Hongwen, in that book, the Xun's book, Era of Revolution and Rebellion, in the end, it's very interesting. I think Wang Hongwen began the Cultural Revolution all the way to become the deputy chairman of the party is always from victory to victory. He never experienced defeat. And I think to have a true revolutionary leader, you have to learn from your defeat. You cannot be demoralized. You cannot be lost your spirit of struggle. When Wang Hongwen went to the Central Committee, you find out all these old generals, everybody don't look down on him. And his suggestions not taken seriously. And he feel very disappointed, very disillusioned. And he apparently drink a lot. And it's not like somebody like Mao in the 30s in Jiangang Mountain area. Remember when Mao was demoted and for a few years, nobody see him. What does he do? He read Marxist classics. He went to the countryside, study about class relationship and investigation. You can do a lot of things. So instead of being passive, Mao was actively using that time to study, investigate. So he's always at lookout how to promote a revolution. It's not about personal stuff. I don't care how you see me. If you don't give me responsibility, good, now I have more time to do other stuff. Apparently, Wang Hongwen is disappointed and demoralized and didn't use that time to really go around the country. I don't know, I mean, what's ability to do, but being deputy chairman of the party, he has a lot of opportunity to do investigations and be humble, go to different places, talk to different people, and investigate. You don't have to be one that telling people what to do. You can be student. I mean, you can do a lot of stuff. A true revolutionary leader, not just a fighter, okay? So as again before, our revolutionary fighters, to be true revolutionary leaders, you have to know how to survive in defeat, as well as how to win. You have to be able to withstand isolation and loneliness, all kinds of stuff. The reason I think Mao was able to do so differently than other leaders in the history, why he's emphasizing correct handling two types of contradictions, because he was minority for a long time. Even though he went to the First Party's Congress, but he was not the leader. He was not a big theoretician. Nobody really looked him up for some leadership. He just in the peasant movement. He's a practice. He wanted to get something done, but he was really being suppressed a long time. But from my understanding, Lenin was always the leader, right? And Stalin is always the leader. None of them really long time being dismissed by the people in the party. Yeah, so they have very different experience. And that different experience affect how they see the world. And that's why Mao is always thinking about how to educate people, how to change people's mind. Even though you're a minority view, how to struggle in the party, trying to convince the majority to your view. So I think what's important in the inter-party struggle in the communist movement, the point is not to show off how correct you are. You always have to think about how to make what you think is the correct thing become the common understanding. That is the goal. If you think what's correct, you work to make that become a common understanding. Not force people to agree with you, but make them believe that's true. Then you have a very powerful movement. That's the difficulty. So if you're really smart, it's not to engage polemic and knock down other people, but how to unite other people, cure the disease to save the patient. That is power. So I always amazed about the power of ideas. Once people grasp Marxism, dialectical materialism, if the working class grasps that, the world will be so different. So that's what really matters. So a lot of polemics trying to knock down other sides, trying to show off how brilliant I am or we are, is not seeing the big picture.
So I wanted to ask you about this change from socialist realism to this combination of revolutionary realism and revolutionary romanticism, because even in the 1934, like First Soviet Writers' Congress, people like Zhdanov and Gorky, they were already talking about how revolutionary romanticism is ingrained in socialist realism. Now, what's interesting from the research that I've been able to do of that switch between socialist realism and revolutionary romanticism is that the first time you mentioned it was a letter to poet and the editor of poetry, Sanke Jia, if I'm pronouncing that right, in 1958 during the Great Leap Forward, and then gets officially adopted in 1960 during the Third National Congress of Literary and Art Workers. And then you have Zhou Yang and Guo Moro who are talking about this, which is really during the time of the Sino-Soviet split. So my hunch has always been, if socialist realism already kind of contains a difference between bourgeois realism and revolutionary realism, and as well as revolutionary romanticism, how much did the Sino-Soviet split really inform the need to create a different category, with the notion that socialist realism was applied mechanically in the Soviet Union? So I get the sense of wanting to push away from the mechanical application, but not sure what really warranted the creation of a different category.
Tell you the truth, you asked the wrong person. I'm just totally ignorant in this subject. All I can say is that we have to separate the form and content of art. See, I'm not an artist. I have no idea what this is about. What I'm guarding against is the tendency among the revolutionaries treating things that they're not familiar with and label them as capitalist. For example, there's a lot of critique of jazz in China. I mean, when I first came to the US, I lived with my uncle, and my uncle's wife at that time is a Black woman, Joanne, and she loves jazz. So she played jazz all when she come home. And I have to listen to that things that just give me goosebumps. So it's not something I like, but I have no right to tell or label that as capitalist. You know, there was a debate in 75, 76 about class nature of titleless music. I forgot what's the translation that is.
The class nature of absolute music, I think is how it was translated.
Yeah, absolute music, no class character.
Yeah, I totally go for it. And I was saying that you can see revolutionary music is so full of energy, international, and all that stuff. And my parents just laughed at me. Because that could be also fascist march and whatever it is, all right? The difference about emotion and what the emotion is about. I mean, you have music you play during a funeral that's very deep and just melody make you feel crying, sad. You can play that when Mao died, or you can play that when Hitler died. So it depends on the context. That emotion, okay? Angry, sad, elated, depends on what, towards what. That's what's important. You cannot say sad is capitalist feelings. Music, I mean, art in general, I think we have to distinguish between the form and the content. And to label a certain form as capitalist, I think is misguided. Even today in China, some youth are very critical of Japanese cartoon art. So a lot of people tell me, we got to critique this art. This is reactionary, this is the whatever. I mean, label all them. I don't get it. Why do you say that? Is you think a working class cannot use that art? I just don't see why. And so I get criticized by people like I'm not a staunch revolutionary and all that. All right, well, whatever. That's freedom of speech. You can say whatever you want, okay? During Cultural Revolution, same thing. Quite often, when people not used to certain things, from moral or from, like, what is a proletariat moral? I mean, having free sex, is that capitalist? Is that working class? So a lot of time, I learned to be humble about that. Just like something I don't know, I don't feel comfortable, but is that my baggage or is that my ignorance? Like a sexual relationship, one thing I believe is equality. And I feel on the basic equality, then people decide what they want to do. Only thing principle I have is equality. And if people don't have to worry about the consequence, don't have to worry about their income, don't have to worry about something else, the human being will explore all kinds of new relationships. But in China, just came from a feudal society, they treat any kind of romance as capitalist. Of course, people today in the US won't do that because you come from a very different cultural background. But during the Cultural Revolution, a lot of people label as capitalist voters. It's because they have extramarital sexual affairs. So you have to analyze, is that extramarital sexual relationship is because the power dynamic or true romance? Without investigation, you don't know what it is. So art and literature is the same way. There's so many art forms, like abstract paint. Can we do that for serving the working class? I don't know, maybe. Why is one form of art can only serve capitalists? Just like any technology. Is there a technology that only serves capitalists, cannot serve working class? I don't know of. So art isn't the same way. I'm ignorant because I'm not an artist. I mean, there are different styles. There are different approach. Again, it's just about aim versus means. When we do art, are you only focused on expressing yourself? When you do art, you're not just doing it for yourself. You want to show to other people. What are you trying to convey in that? Is closely related to your ideology, your worldviews. The painting or a sculpture convey sadness, struggle, fist up, or begging, or whatever. I mean, just like, it depends what you're trying to do, I guess. So all the labels, I'm totally ignorant. So I can't help you on that side.
Yeah, but that was already really insightful. And I've always wondered about some of the heavy-handedness. I guess if you read some of the pieces about during the Cultural Revolution, this is the way. And also, especially with Jiang Qing's hand in there, a lot of articles of the model opera works. There's the opera works, but there's always this kind of glorification of Jiang Qing's role in there as well.
Well, Jiang Qing is, you must give her a hand. I mean, she really did a great job. In the Chinese opera today, only one survive are these ones. I mean, it has become such an ingrained part of Chinese culture. Some people are trying to promote the old ones. Nobody likes it. Only the modern plays, almost every one of them, survive, loved by people. Even the capitalist writers like them. They can't help it.
I know that everybody knew about them, but how many people were really able to see these productions in person? I'm sure there was a difference between cities and the countryside too.
All of them. It's all you can see is those things. So in the countryside, in the broadcast, in the movie, and everything, and too few of others. And that was a criticism. And it's a legitimate criticism, but it's a criticism of contradiction among the people. Deng and the capitalist orders came to power using that contradiction among the people and attack the revolutionaries and taking the weakness of the revolutionaries and denouncing the whole thing. And today what we see, it's all ruling class, the capitalists. Today we have, like one guy described, he says, the sorrow, the sadness. These people, we used to have 7 housemates. Now they only have 1. It's so sad. I mean, it's obvious. Today's art have a hard time relating to people's real life. And so what they do is talk about, like the US, just love, death. Very few deal with people's real life struggles. I used to read a lot of novels, love to have the love stories, and then happily ever after. But then when I get married, I find out it's not happily ever after. How do they deal with the day-to-day lives? I cannot find any guidance from these novels or movies. That's when I stopped reading novels because they don't deal with real life.
You know, it's interesting in the US, there's a weird sort of art form now that is very popular. It's kind of a form of postmodern cinema, other stuff too, but especially prominent cinema, where like the entire problems of the universe are just reduced down to people's family problems. And then it's shown that nothing can be resolved, no one can change, everything is pointless, but just go on living anyways. You'll find something. And it's very dark, and it's framed in very progressive, liberal terms. A lot of young people see this uncritically, and they accept a lot of these narratives, unfortunately.
Something even worse, when my kids were young, Lion King came about. And meantime, I was doing my dissertation, and once in a while I watched the Nature Channel, seeing what the lions, the male lions, do in real world. When they conquer a bunch of a female lion, they kill off all the other baby lions. So I was telling my daughters, this is really bad because Lion King promotes this legitimate king. It's like, and so today, a lot of Chinese movie promote same kind of ideology. So I use the Lion King story as a parallel. So people says, yeah, we'd rather be eaten by the legitimate king than the other. So we are so honored to be eaten by the real king. I mean, the ideology is just so reactionary, so blatant. It's just like feudal ideology. I mean, just like genuine bloodline rather than the uncle trying to usurp the power. My God, what kind of, but the art is so good. The music so good. All the animals so happy that real king came alive.
Or you have a similar parallel in another movie or series of movies, Lord of the Rings,
Right.
where you have this industrial society that's depicted as evil in Mordor,
Right.
and this evil king and all the goblins and working
Right.
industrial organization. And then you have the just king, because 2,000 years ago, his ancestor was king, and he comes, everyone's like, oh, peace is restored.
Right.
So, very reactionary feudal ideology. Yeah.
I know. I mean, so you can just see the art form and the content is two different stories. We can use that art form. Peking opera is such a feudal art form. And we're glorifying the guerrilla warfares, we're glorifying the working class struggle, and ballet. How bourgeois can you be in the ballet? We have red detachment women. So separating the form from the content is the first step. But whether revisionary content can be expressed through this form, that's artist's job.
Okay, so for a final question, I know you've been traveling in the US a little bit recently, and I know you've investigated both the working class movement here in the US and as well as some of the student encampments. So I was just wondering if you could share just a bit of what you've seen in terms of different contradictions amongst the people and the movements. What's been positive? What have you seen as some shortcomings? I mean, obviously, since you're just visiting briefly, you won't have had so much time to investigate, but still, I think your insights will be very interesting to hear.
Well, one is just that the amount of young people participating in the encampment is very encouraging, very exciting. It's almost like the Occupy movement, but that petered out very fast. And this one is more widespread. So you can see regeneration of a lot of people's movement. And also I participated in many of the labor work, made me more determined to have the Chinese Cultural Revolution experience broadly spread in the English world. I find so many people fighting for socialism, for communism, without understanding of the Cultural Revolution and understanding that actually the future of working class movement is all embedded in the history of the Cultural Revolution. And the goal, the difficulties, the challenges is out there, and made me really want to spend a lot more effort trying to get people to have at least this book about the Cultural Revolution in Shanghai translated to English, so I have a broader audience to understand. That is a very good book because the writer, she is a writer. She is a social democrat type, and she's anti-Mao, anti-Cultural Revolution. So what she says has a lot more bearing, and you cannot complain that she's biased. If anything biased, she's not seeing enough positive things of the rebel workers in the Cultural Revolution, but what she was able to lay out the real history, the complexity. So it's really incredible material to study about the contradictions, and it's not a rah-rah revolutionary that kind, but it's a very detailed description what happened and all the nuances. And some of the chapters, like one chapter is about the crimes of Cultural Revolution, how many people in prison, how many people doesn't tell you why they were in prison, what was the struggle about. And so just a purely condemnation, but without getting into the details. And but others has a lot of details worth studying. So like you said, I really didn't have a lot of time to find out what the movements in US really like what the debates are there, what the issues. I'm very ignorant. But what I see is a tremendous amount of interest demonstrated among the young people. In the labor note conference that I went there, talked to all these activists and trade unions. And I went to encampment the other day. UPenn's 4,000 graduate students organized union, and they have 95% vote for yes. They spent 4 years organizing, and this year just overwhelming, just like incredible. You can see that labor movement is an upswing in the US, and so many energetic, enthusiastic young people are engaging it. And so it is the crisis of capitalism that forces people to see capitalism the way it is. So make people to think twice about continue this system, and also the support for Palestinian make people more aware about imperialism. So you have domestic labor organizing, international solidarity to the oppressed people. These are very encouraging, very encouraging. That's gave me a lot of hope. And yet at the same time, people are not too clear about the future that holds for working class. That's why we need to study the Cultural Revolution. That's what I think.
Yeah, well, I think you said it very well. And I think you really, you said you didn't have many insights, but that's a very key one, actually, and definitely a big blind spot now in the US movement. Well, thank you so much, Fred, for all your time and for talking with us. It's been incredibly insightful and really clarifying. And you just have a wealth of knowledge about all these topics. I feel we could have gone for many more hours.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. This was incredibly insightful, from the big picture to really getting down to the nitty gritty of details. And I think having that combination of insight is rare. And like you said, the lessons of the Cultural Revolution for people who are really trying to build up the Communist Party and really engage in this work, these lessons are critical now. It's not something of like, oh, that'll be relevant after, the seizure of state power or some abstract stuff like that. But there's so many lessons that really apply to us now and current, but we're not going to be able to really make use of those lessons that the comrades learned the hard way sometimes if we don't study. So
on the other hand, people learn the hard way. I mean, people without some defeat, they think we are better, but actually only bloody nose, and they realize, oh shit, we got to do this thing differently. And people always learn the hard way, but just that having learned some previous struggle, you become more acute, or you can overcome your mistake quicker. That's all we can hope for.